This is our first benefits committee meeting for 2025. It's April 7th at around 1 o'clock. And glad everybody showed up. We're just going to review some claims, and everyone was emailed the renewal documentation that we have so far, just our pre-renewal. So we're going to go over our claims experience, some insights as to what's actually going on with health insurance at this time, and discuss a little bit about our renewal timeline, and then we'll have some time for discussion at the end if anyone has questions. I just want to introduce Jacob Walser. He's a new member, and Nemanja, I'm going to destroy your last name, Kuzmanovic. Okay, close. He's one of our new members as well. Glad you are here. So I'll let Sean from the Gary Group take it away.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good to see a bunch of you again, and some of you for the first time. So, for those of you that have been kind of around for a couple of years, typically in April, just for everybody, the city's plan runs January to January. So typically what we do in the April meeting is we like to look at how the plan finished last year, how we're starting off this year, and then Cigna gives us a bunch of reporting once the plan year finalizes that really does a little bit of a deeper dive into, as Jill said, kind of what's driving things, both good and bad. And so that's really the bulk of what we want to cover today, and just kind of start setting the stages over the next couple of months. And our next couple of meetings, we start talking more actually about renewals, plan, and for some of those things. So since some of you haven't been here before, I'm going to go through a couple of the pages just in a little bit more detail to get us started off. But feel free at any point in time to stop me, ask any questions, throw something at me. Agree, disagree, everything is well, almost everything. So if you guys want to start, if you flip a couple pages in, you'll see two pages that look like this, the medical claims experience. I'm actually going to ask you to go to, it looks like the printer hates some of the page numbers on certain pages, but go to the second one, which is 2024 in its entirety. I'm going to kind of cover what all these columns are and explain everything on 2024, and then we'll work about our first couple months of 2025 data. So for anybody that doesn't know, or maybe a newer term, the city has what's called a self-funded medical plan. So what that means, and I'll use your auto or home insurance as an example on the other side. There's really two types of plans out there. There's fully insured, which is unlike your auto or your home insurance, I pay a premium and all the risk falls on the insurance company, right? That's one model. What the model that the city has is what's called self-funded. So what that means is essentially the city pays a third party, Cigna in this case, to administer the plan, right? To recruit doctors, to manage different benefits, pharmacy, all those things. But ultimately, the city pays the cost of all the expenses that are incurred with that, which is the claims. So if you go to a doctor, you pay your copay, the bulk of that claim gets picked up actually by the city. Runs through Cigna, but the city ultimately is on the hook for that. So what that means is that in any given year, whatever the city budgets for the plan, costs can be higher or lower than that actual budget. So there's some science that goes into it each year, but ultimately the city's on the hook for that claims experience, both good or bad. The reason the city is under that model, and it's common for most groups your size, but one of the big reasons is any investment you make in things like wellness programs or the health center that ultimately are meant to remove costs from the medical plan. That way the city gets the immediate benefit of that. So we've got a very busy page here, but I'm going to just walk you through real quick what these columns are. So the first one, looking at 2024, is the plan funding. So that is essentially employees are on the plan in each tier, and there's a funding rate assigned to each year of coverage. We multiply those out, add all those together, and you'll see that for the year, the city funding based on those rates was just shy of about $24 million for the medical plan. Of that, 23.6 million, how does that get divided up? So the first column, you see network and administration fees. So that's what Cigna gets paid to administer your plan. About 70,000 a month out of just shy of the 2 million kind of budget. I do always like to put that in perspective. I think, insurance companies, and a lot of it rightly so, but they get vilified on the news. But it's important to kind of remember that the bulk of your costs actually come from other things. It's very low fee they're actually getting paid kind of for operating this program. So the next column is what we call stop loss. You'll see a couple numbers there, but basically what that means is, let's say I have a premature baby that's born on a plan tomorrow and ends up being $1 million stay in the NICU, right? The city pays the first 300,000 of that claim out of their pocket, and then what we call reinsurance kicks in and picks up the rest of that claim, right? So if you have, somebody has a really rare diagnosis. I saw one the other day, a $600,000 medication claim. The city would only be on the hook for the first 300 in that scenario. But it's meant to ultimately, keep those kind of one-off, two-offs a year moments from dramatically, hurting the plan and causing a situation where as employees or the city, you would have to pay more. So the next column then is medical claims. So medical claims is essentially going to be anything other than what we call retail or mail order pharmacy. So think about going to CVS, Walgreens, all those things. That's going to be your next column, which is pharmacy. Everything else falls under medical. The reason I give that little bit of delineation is, let's say you have somebody getting like chemo treatments in a hospital. That chemo, even though it's a medication, is going to go under the medical claim because it was delivered in a hospital. But basically, anything you can get on your own is going to be under pharmacy. If you just kind of look, December jumps out, you'll see that December we had a very high month. We add those two up, actual paid claims. In December, you had 2.6 million. That was due to a couple incidences which both had high pharmacy and medical claims costs. So in each month, you see we've got a reserve account column. And what that is basically whether or not the budgeted amount for the plan covered its expenses for the month. So obviously red is bad, and the black is positive. So you'll see that you had some months, you had more months in the red, but if you look right below that $867,000 loss, what the plan gets is for all these brand name drugs that are filled, is a lot of the manufacturers pay a rebate to ultimately reduce the cost of the medications. So those come in once a year. So the city last year got about 1.8 million in pharmacy rebates. So that offsets some of the losses ongoing throughout the months. And we have kind of an estimate of that, ahead of the year based on utilization. So, we're able to take that into consideration funding. Otherwise, we'd be overfunding and then we get this big payment of pharmacy rebates. So we try and build that in. So last year, and then the city also has a program through Cigna called Embark. If somebody gets, there's a couple of what they call gene therapies out now. Like there's one for hemophilia as an example. It's like between 3.1 and 3.4 million dollars for the medication. Basically, the city pays Cigna $1 per member per month throughout the year. And if the city ever has one of those claims, it doesn't pay your claims experience at all. And whatever Cigna doesn't use across their whole book of business, they offer that to all their clients. They give any of the excess back, kind of pro rata out to all groups. So that was that 15,000. So last year, the plan finished with a surplus of about 686,000 out of 23, almost 24 million. So I know 686,000 sounds like a lot, but that's really only a couple percent of margin. So if you guys look down below, a couple numbers you want to kind of look at. There's a chart that says medical and pharmacy net claims PEPMs. So that's per employee per month. So what we do is we take the medical and pharmacy claims, we divide it out by the number of employees on the claim. If you take a look, you'll see that from 23 to 24, your medical costs, your medical claims per employee went up 2.7%, which is really good, by the way, less than just regular inflation. Medical inflation typically 3 to 4 times regular inflation. But your pharmacy went up 20% year over year. Pharmacy, it's not dollar for dollar, there's a lot less spend on pharmacy. So the overall down below is about an 8.5% increase. But you can see that the bulk of that is driven by pharmaceuticals, and it's really your brand new pharmaceuticals, which we'll talk about. Just a couple other stats down below. You had 16 individuals that had claims over 125,000 on the plan. That's that middle box. So it's basically less than 1% of your membership drove 15% of the spend overall. All right. Any questions on that? Everybody good?
Does anybody have any questions online?
All right, so if you guys want to flip to now the page with 2025, everything is essentially set up the same. You had slight deficits in January and February. What was just received in March, but I want to put it on here just so we had it for the meeting. Even though we don't have the March medical claims yet, was the annual pharmacy rebate, which went up about 800,000, so 2.6 million last year coming in pharmacy rebates. So pretty significant rebate there, and then again that March surplus that was a little bit. So if you take a look down below, medical is actually down about 2.6% this year. So if you think about that in kind of perspective, it was up 2.7 last year, which basically means the city's pretty much spending the same amount on medical care as it was back in 2023, which is really good to have zero inflation, over that time period. Obviously, we have more time period this year. Pharmacy, however, is up another 12.3% on top of the 20% that it was up last year. And we've got some slides where we're going to talk about really what's driving that in a couple of pages. But that's a high level overview of the claims. Obviously, the surplus shows substantial, but remember, we only get that pharmacy rebate once a year. So when we add 10 more months of data, that's probably going to keep that down. So in that regard. The next page is just a graph of the total claims per employee per month. This shows those of you who are You guys have any questions?
Well, real quick.
Yes.
The 2024 surplus, would that 686, would that roll into the next year, or is that?
So ultimately, so that rolls into ultimately the health fund and goes towards, any of the reserve requirements for the state. So it does roll. per se, and then if you have a higher than expected year, it won't roll on the report, but it rolls in the city's bank account per se, but it won't roll on. So the state, just so everyone knows, the state has a minimum requirement that you have 2 months worth of claims in reserve as a self-funded government.
With medical and pharmacy.
Yeah, correct. All right, so if we flip 2 pages, what we really have is basically a lot of just a little bit deeper dive into some of that info from Cigna. So page 9 takes that medical and pharmacy, and instead of just giving you the year-over-year look, goes back all the way to 2019. So if you look at the blue line in the middle, which is medical, you'll essentially see we had a little bit of a dip, a couple of increases, but what the plan is spending on medical care is basically flat over 5 years, which is fantastic in the grand scheme of things. Not many groups can say that. I think a lot of that is the clinic, some of the wellness, some of those things, but the clinic obviously really helps to control by not having the cost escalations that when you go straight out to the market happens, because the city pays for those services more of a flat, essentially a flat rate, even though there's nominal purposes. So the orange is the total, which is about 4.7%, which is still great, but then you see the green line, which essentially is just going up at the 18%. There's no dips, there's no real variation in those numbers. And what Cigna kind of put below with those years is just a little bit of a kind of marker on some of the things that were going on. So in 2021, you saw kind of how medical spiked. Pharmacy wasn't really subject to this, but medical had been low in 2020. Of course, that was COVID. Then it kind of caught back up in 21, and then it's really leveled out. But the big thing we're going to talk about is you'll see the notes they have in 2023 and 24. A big part of what is driving plan costs for both the city and for everyone is the new hypoglycemic medications that have come out. So Ozempic, Mounjaro for diabetes, but also added kind of benefit, you would say, for that they ultimately lead to weight loss for a lot of individuals. There have been some doctors playing a little bit fast and loose with what they write up in their medical notes on, whether or not, because there's been a big push for a lot of these medications. There are also shortages, so that led to some things.
Sean, is that 18% a year typical what you're seeing for other clients, or are we on the high end?
It's pretty typical. We typically, like most of those charts we look at on the first page, if I had to just look at a lot of them, medical's probably been in the 5 to 8% range, and pharmacy has typically been in the 8 to 25% range year over year. So it's definitely something that has to be watched. It has the potential to be an unsustainable path. I mean, someone maybe already is, but the GLP-1 medications, the pharmaceutical companies are trying to get them approved for a lot of things other than diabetes. So one of them just got approved for sleep apnea, as an example. Not on the formulary yet for that, but FDA approved for sleep apnea. Trying to get approval for high cholesterol, hypertension in different conditions. A lot of the meds are anywhere from 1,300 to 1,500 a month. So you think about how quick that can escalate. And you'll see under that 2024 Mounjaro, which is one of the main two, you had 136% year-over-year increase in number of scripts. So page 10 is just a little bit more of a breakdown of some of that. So last year, so non-catastrophic medical. So catastrophic is going to be anyone that has 50,000 or more in claims throughout the calendar year. You had about an 11.2% increase, but you actually had less catastrophic claims last year. So you had a 22% decrease in spend for those like cancer, some of those higher cost items, which is a good thing. And then your pharmacy, 25% just year over year on that, and specialty pharmacy, which is going to be things like your Emeralds, your Humiras, these higher cost drugs, went up about 23%. So it just gives you a little bit more of a breakout of kind of what was driving some of those things. And if you flip to page 11, this is going to dive into that pharmaceutical numbers a little bit. So if you look at that box on the right, hypoglycemics is going to be diabetes meds. You have essentially a 13.5 of your overall trend, 13.5% of that increase was diabetes meds. And then anti-inflammatory disease modifiers, that's going to be your Emeralds, Ramirez, Stelara for psoriasis. Those are kind of your big two categories. You do see, however, that insulin went down. So the GLP medications, there are some individuals that are coming off insulin because of the positive effects of the medications. What's really, really good, if you look on the left, is deconditioned medication adherence rates. So using the top one, hypertension as an example, that's high blood pressure, right? I would say that, if you're hypertensive, you need to take your high blood pressure medicine every month, let's say. The city has an 81% compliance rate versus 77% is the norm. Diabetes, 88%. Depression, 75%, and cholesterol, 80%. So when you look at those lower medical numbers, the fact that, we've got less heart attacks, we've got less strokes, we've got a lot of these less, people would make the argument that's because people are taking their meds, they're avoiding the expensive hospitalization. They're taking the preventative steps in that regard that they need to do. So some positive items there. The other one in the small print that's a little, hard to read, but you have a 91% generic utilization rate. So 91% of all the medicines that run through the plan are generic drugs. And as you guys know, if you fill the generic, the bulk of them, although there's a few exceptions, are very, very low cost. So that's positive. The flip side of that is it's that 9% of brand name drugs that are driving the bulk of the cost. Your guys' generic utilization rate is a little bit below the norm for Cigna of 92.9, but that's because of the health center. Because a lot of people get those generic meds through the health center, so what you're left with is more people on the plan getting brand name drugs and not more utilization, but it's a bigger piece of the pie for the county. All right, so before we dive into the drugs a little bit more, page 12 is kind of a cancer summary for the year. And the chart on the right is the screening rates. So breast cancer, city employees and their dependents, they're basically meeting their breast cancer screening rates. Getting the screenings done 73% of the time, which is fantastic. Cigna norm is 68. Cervical, you're at 58 versus 61. but they can do some of those in the health center, so that skews that a little bit. And then colorectal cancer, you're at 42 versus 46 at the norm. So pretty close. I mean, the only thing I'd say about that is, you know, less than half the people getting it that need to isn't really a great benchmark to aspire to. I mean, I know it's the norm, but it's still, only 46% of people that should be getting a colonoscopy or are actually getting it. So there is still a lot of opportunity out there. And you may know this, but I think they just recently even lowered the actual age on the guidelines. I think it's 45 now, right? It used to be 50 to get your free preventative colonoscopy. It's down to 45. They're seeing more colon cancer. Do you guys have any questions on that? All right, so here's where kind of some of the interesting pages with the pharmacy. So page 13, these are going to be your top, what we call therapeutic classes. So number one is diabetes. So if you look in that unique members column, you have 309 individuals receiving a medication for diabetes on the plan. You have 27 in what we call the anti-inflammatory category. So that's going to be arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis. If you've seen a commercial for it during a sporting game or a golf tournament, that's for Emerald Humira. That's what we're talking about there. Psoriasis, number 3, is kind of a subcategory of that. They actually used to lump them all together. It's a lot of the same medications with some variants. But the claims started being so many that they started breaking them out, kind of tracking them separately. And then you can go down. You see that migraine came up a little bit on the list. Your first 4 were kind of unchanged, but you'll see migraines in that regard. And then, or excuse me, I'm sorry, I read the columns reversed. That didn't make sense. Migraine actually dropped down one. And then what is interesting down on the bottom is you see like insulins. The year before it was number 7 on that list. It went down to number 14. So that's part of that is the some of those medications. So real quick, if you guys go to page 15, and then I'll go back to 14. This is probably the page that I would say jumps out the most. So your top drug last year on the plan was Mounjaro. That is a GLP-1 for diabetes. You had $1.7 million spent just on one medication. What's crazy about that is if we ran a report and we went back 3 years, this drug basically just came out 3 years ago. So it went, if you think about it this way, it went from 0 to almost 1.8 million. So when we talk about, increases to the plan and something, that's $1.7 million that wasn't there 2 years ago. If you go down to number 4, Ozempic, essentially the same category, just a different brand, 356,000. So basically those GLP-1 medications are $2 million of new spend basically over 2 years. And then you'll see Stelara, number 2 for psoriasis. What's pretty crazy is you have 3 people taking the medication, so at a price tag of $486,000. and then you can kind of go down the list, you see a number of other brightest ones. So if you want on page 16, just to get an idea of kind of the cost of some of these ads, complex driving it. Um, you know, there's there's a couple different numerals on there, because sometimes it's administered differently, it has different doses. But Humira runs anywhere between almost $7,000 a script, up to 20,500 a script. And I like to hit on that because we work with a lot of groups, we do a lot of, and people will complain about their benefits, right? And I've benefit plan, I complain about my benefits too. So everybody does it, so nobody feels guilty about it. But, when you have a $30 or a $50 copay and your plan's picking up $20,000 a month, I think it helps as a committee and in general to just kind of conceptualize, like, yeah, maybe I don't love everything about my benefits, but I'm getting a pretty good deal. Like the city's picking up a pretty big cost on an individual's behalf with some of those things. And you guys can kind of just look down. There's a number of different ones, but you'll see that. Let's see. So Emerald, Ozempic and Mounjaro they're about $1,300 to $1,500 a month. They couldn't even break the top 20, 13 to 1,500, just to give you a perspective.
These are prescriptions that run through our waiting clinic as well.
Yeah, so basically, if you flip to page 17 even, this is probably an easier way to look at it.
Okay.
If it's capitalized, it's a brand name.
Okay.
So that one's not gonna run through the health center.
Okay.
The bulk of, so this is your top drugs by volume on page 17. So regardless of the cost, what is being taken the most? Anything with lowercase is a generic,
Okay.
and the bulk of those are being dispensed through the health center. But your number, so think about that. Your number one most utilized per member. It's not necessarily the most number of scripts, but most members utilizing more than anything else is Mounjaro. And when you take Ozempic with another, 50 members on there, some of those people moved, by the way, between the two because of shortages. It's a huge impact that it's having. And there you see the Mounjaro about 1,030 on average. The Ozempic is actually a little bit lower at 871. My understanding is more people have had reactions to Ozempic than Mounjaro, so I think a lot of people have switched.
Quick question, reference that. Sorry, real quick, with the Ozempic and the Mounjaro, is obviously the cost is extremely high and a lot of members are on it. Are all those members diagnosed diabetic, or are the doctors prescribing it for weight loss and then Cigna's paying the exorbitant amount of money for those medications?
So the Cigna is screening, but the screening, the level of screening right now. So let me give you an example. I have groups that have no screening at all, right? Doctor writes the script, it goes through, no problem. On your plan, the member needs to have a diagnosis of diabetes on file, and needs to have essentially an A1C over, I can't remember the number, but basically a test on file that shows the A1C, the A1C was done. But could an unscrupulous doctor, code someone as being diabetic in their visit, and, go do that, yes. So one thing that we're gonna talk about with the committee coming into renewal is Cigna, in response to this, has built a program where they can ratchet that up even further next year. And that's something we're gonna present to the committee at renewal time. It's not something we can do mid-year. But that's something we are gonna present. Candidly, if you think about it this way, right? We've all probably watched a commercial for a prescription. And normally you're like, oh, you hear all the side effects and you're like, would I even want to take it? Right? So we've never had this problem before where people wanted to take a medication for the side effect. So the systems really weren't built around the idea that somebody would want to get a drug for an off-label usage. So the carriers kind of had to scramble and say, wait a minute, now we have this unique problem. What they always had built in before was, here's a drug that's been around for 30 years and there's a $3 generic, but your doctor tries to write you the brand name that's exactly the same thing that costs $300. They had all the systems built for that. They never really had true systems built to say somebody's going to try and get a drug for something that it's not used for. So now they built that out, right? And that's something that for the next renewal, we'll be looking at. Do I think it's all of your claims? Not by any means, because when you look at, we know a certain percentage of the population is diabetic, all those things. But do I think there's probably some out there where it's a little borderline and the doctor's been willing to say, willing to do it? Yes. And the other thing I would say about that is, it's easy to sit in a room and say, how can the doctor do that or whatever? But from a lot of doctors' perspectives, regardless of what it's approved for, they feel if they can get somebody to lose X number of pounds and lower their cholesterol and lower their blood sugar, even if they're not diabetic, and lower their, hypertension, that there's a positive effect. I understand why they're doing it. The thing is, when you see the price tag, and you think about how many people in your population have one of those, right? I mean, most of them probably have multiple, but that's not just like 10% of the population now. I mean, 70% of Americans are overweight. Like, so imagine if we had to put 70% of Americans on $1,000 a month drug, we're really gonna have some problems. I mean, these are not covered on Medicare yet. Because basically you talk to people that kind of know, they're like, these drugs go on Medicare, it's gonna bankrupt the entire country. So that's kind of what's going on out there. Just so you guys, have an idea, but it is a big driver of costs for almost all of our groups right now.
Thank you.
You guys have any other questions on that part?
I do, but it's more, I think, probably hypothetical at this point, or theoretical, maybe, I don't know. Have any studies been done about what the long-term effect of not addressing the overweight with all of the potential medical issues as a result versus, I understand it's a huge investment upfront with these.
Yep.
GLP-1s, but if we put more constraints in place and there is this 70% overweight problem long term, it seems like that would still cost more in the long run, we're just saying today. But it's also me just kind of doing quick.
No, I think it's a fantastic question. I think it's a question a lot of people have and they're struggling with, even like, do I not cover them? I mean, you can't really not cover them, but do I make it more restrictive? And what I would say is I don't think they've been out long enough to truly okay, the pharmaceutical companies will, oh, we did a study and, people that went on it, oh, their cholesterol lowered by X percentage. But I don't think that anybody feels there's a big enough data set yet to know, like, is that a short-term drop? Is that a long-term lifestyle change? I think the other thing that they probably just don't have enough data on yet is like, okay, I mean, somebody does it, let's say they go from a BMI of 30 to 25. Well, now what do? Like, do they have to keep taking it or do they come off? Because I mean, almost every meeting I'm at, somebody will call out someone that works in their office. They won't say their name, but they'll be like, oh, we'll use Bob. Anybody knows there's Bob. That's like, you know, Bob back there, he looks horrible because he's lost. I mean, if almost everybody's probably heard someone say that, right? If somebody's lost too much weight from taking it, but then they go off it and the weight, so I think the question that the industry has to figure out is like, is this something that most people can do for 3 months to jumpstart and then kind of come off, or are they going to be on it the rest of their life? If you ask, the pharmaceutical companies that make it, I'm sure they want you on it the rest of their life. But I think the flip side is if you can generate change with someone, does that create? I don't think anyone actually knows that. The answer yet. Um, you know, I have my own theories that until we start changing what the quality of people's food, I don't think it's gonna happen. Like the chemicals and all that. That's my theory, but I have no scientific backing.
We'll schedule another meeting for the GMOs.
Yeah, exactly. So slide 14 real quick. I just always like to hit on this. This is your emergency room usage. Kind of skipped it because it got lumped in with the pharmacy there. And this is so Cigna looks at your emergency room usage based on the diagnosis, based on the codes. And what I would say is don't get too wrapped up in it because there's always special circumstances when it comes to going to the emergency room. But globally speaking, what they look at is what they call non-steerable, which is basically you went to the right place. And steerable means like you went to the ER with a sinus infection. You wasted a bunch of money by not going to urgent care. You did have a 28% increase in your steerable visits, which basically means somebody could have gone somewhere else. Now, something at 12 in the afternoon versus 12 in the morning, partially may dictate where you go, right? Urgent cares aren't open at midnight. So that's why I say take it with a grain of salt. But I think always, keeping a reminder, making sure people know. I mean, you had 23 people down below. You had 23 people go to the emergency room for something ear, nose, and throat related. That might not be all 23 made the wrong choice, but a good portion of those. Musculoskeletal, I think the big thing there is a lot of people don't realize that urgent cares, can do a lot more than that. A lot of people don't realize urgent cares have x-rays or that they can treat the minor sprains, some of those things. Obviously if your bone's sticking out of your leg, you want to go to the ER. But even a lot of the urgent cares can even do casting for some of the simple breaks. So you had $105,000 of spend where people went to the ER when they probably could have gone to the urgent care. So just keeping in mind that there's offerings out there, and then the rest of them after those two categories, it really drops pretty significantly. So nothing major of alarm, but I think just making sure people understand that the urgent care can't handle musculoskeletal and some of those things. So that's kind of the end of the claims section. Everything mostly awake, which is positive. The actual report Cigna is about 80 pages. We just picked some of the key ones to give you guys the highlights. Does anyone have any kind of questions on claims, on the medical plan in general, just anything that's going on? So what we have, just kind of the back page is just to give you guys, kind of an idea of what the timing looks like. We'll probably have, two more committee meetings between now and renewal decision, maybe one, maybe, well, we'll schedule one and then typically what happens is the committee, based on if there's an additional info on it or any of those things. But the goal would ultimately be, to be looking at kind of having final decisions on everything, July, so that we can get everything to council ahead of time. So that'll give us another couple months of claims, but typically we look at claims, kind of what we call the midpoint, which is like May, claims through May, June, a pretty good idea. For the little bit that it's worth, overall, you guys are running significantly better than a lot of other. It's really been a pretty high claims year overall. What we don't see in your data at the same level as a lot of groups right now is the claims, which is a good thing. Not that you don't have them, but just frequency and some of the high cost ones, the city hasn't been as impacted in some of our other areas right now. But because really the GLP-1s and cancer are probably the two biggest cost drivers right now. Questions, topics, anything anyone wants to
Any questions?
chat?
Okay, well, if there isn't any other questions, if anyone thinks of anything later, just email me and I can follow up with Sean or give an answer as soon as I can. If not, thank you all for coming and, we'll see you at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.